What could be healthier on a crisp spring morning than a walk among beautiful scenery, calming the mind and touching history? So we've come to visit 14th century Harvington Hall. It's in the English parish of Chaddesley Corbett near Kidderminster, and it's known as the House of Secrets. Why? Well, you'll have to come along with us on the guided tour to find out. However, what I can tell you is it's got more priest hides than any other in England. And in the 1500s, it had strong links with the Catholic Church at a time of great fear, devotion and persecution.
Just mind a step down into here. So welcome to Harvington. There's been a house on this site really since about 1200. It probably started as a fortified manor house. Originally castles were built as England became a safer place. People moved on to these fortified manor houses because you've got the moat all around the house. We assume there would have been a drawbridge on the way you came in over the bridge, but there's no evidence of that now. The house, as you see it today, dates back to about 1578 to Humphrey Packington. And Humphrey Packington wanted to make his house into a nice, up-to-date Tudor house. So it started off as a timber frame build, and we can see remnants of that here and as we go around the house. But to make it an up-to-date Tudor house, he put the red brick on it and modernised his house to a Tudor house. Now, Humphrey and his family lived in this house until his daughter Mary died in about 1696. And they were really the last family to live in this house. After the death of Mary, there were very few alterations made to the house. So that when the house was bought by Mrs. Ryan Ferris in 1923 and given back to the Catholic Church, when they started to investigate the house, they found lots of priest hides. We've got 7 priest hides in the house, and there may have been more, again, as we'll find out about later. Now, the reason for that is that Humphrey was a Catholic. Now, go back to your probably school history lessons, but up until the reign of Henry VIII, everybody in England was Roman Catholic, like the rest of Europe. But when Henry decided to divorce Catherine of Aragon, he wasn't able to get a divorce, so he tapped into Protestantism and set up the Church of England. But that meant that everybody in England had to become Church of England. You couldn't be a Catholic. But there was a group of Catholics, probably only about 8,500, 9,000 of them, living in the whole of England, but they were called recusant Catholics, and they wouldn't go to church. And they ended up having to pay fines if they didn't go to church, and that's what the family here was. They were recusant Catholics. Now, to be a good Catholic, we needed to have a priest. After 1570, Elizabeth had been excommunicated by the Pope. All priests now had to go abroad to train. They went to Douai in France or to Rome. And when they were trained, they would come back to England in secret. And they would obviously have to go secretly from house to house. And that's why we have hiding places, because the pursuivants who were trying to find the priests could come to your house at any time and search it. So you had to have somewhere to hide your priests. So that's why we've got the hides here. So not only were you a different religion, you were also potentially a traitor to the Queen. So it's about power and it's about politics. So it made it very, very dangerous to be a Catholic. So that's the kind of background story to the house. So we're now in the kitchen of the house. Fairly big kitchen. It was only really a family of 4, but you'd have a lot of servants to run a house like this. Probably an extension to the original house, because we've got here one of the original medieval walls, and we've also got a room that's been identified as a dairy. You wouldn't normally have your dairy opening into a warm kitchen, so presumably it was added later. Over here we've got an array of slipware. The remnants of this, it's been reconstructed, were found in the moat, and that helps us to date the house. Presumably somebody broke a plank and quickly got rid of the evidence in the moat. We've got two fireplaces in here. We've got the roasting oven, they use the word oven, roasting oven, where they would obviously roast the meat for the family, particularly when they got visitors. A small boy, on a day like this, is probably quite a welcome job, sat here with the rotating the spit. We've got a hastener over here to hasten the roasting. It's a metal lined screen that you put in front of the fire. And so that would obviously reflect the heat back. He would collect the fat and put it in. It would be put in here, and then you dip reeds from or rushes from the moat in here to make lights, rush lights. So the candles would only be used by rich people. Now over here we've got the boiling oven, and this is where they would have the pot hanging, and they would make pottage. Now pottage is like a soup, you put anything you've got in it, so you put in your bones, you put in your vegetables, you put some oatmeal in it, and you probably would never empty the pot, you'd probably just keep topping it up. And that's what most people would eat, that's what the poor would eat, that's what the servants would eat, and probably people of the house might, if there's no visitors. Over here, we've got the well, which again supports the idea that this wasn't the original kitchen. She wouldn't normally have a well. Must have been very welcome to have it up here, but they would not have had the well in here. So, now the well, the water comes in from the moat. But actually, the water has been tested. It's pretty safe because we're on sandstone, and sandstone acts as a filter. It is also the site of a hide. There is a hide above the oven. So the priest would be, if soldiers came to the house looking for see if there's any priests here, he would enter it from the room above, and he would have to stand on the bread oven. There is some sand in it, but it's not very big, as you'll see in a minute. And obviously, once the pursuivants were here, they would stay. They could stay for days. Sometimes they stayed for days, then went off and then quickly came back trying to catch you out. They would lock people of the house into rooms so that they couldn't help you. They would have to continue to make bread, because if you didn't carry on making bread, they'd be suspicious, and you'd have to feed you, yourself, and the pursuivants. So he'd be stuck in there until they'd gone. Now, the longest anyone stayed in a hide and survived was Scotland Castle. They survived about 10 days. The longest anyone survived before they came out was 12 days. But the usual way you got caught was starving to death, because you think Tudor times there wasn't much you could leave in one of these hides that wouldn't rot. And once you were in there, you were in there. Whatever was in there, that was it. You had to use it as your toilet, you had no light. And as you'll see when we're on the wooden floorboards, there's lots of gaps, so the slightest creak could really be heard, because obviously they'd be looking for you. They'd be measuring to see if there was any discrepancies in the shapes of rooms. They'd be knocking, see if anywhere sounded hollow. So I suppose that's why this is a good idea, because you've actually got, in brick. So it was extremely dangerous, not just for the priest, but also for the people of the house. Because if you got caught with a priest, you could be executed, you could lose your lands. A priest would be executed as a traitor. He would be hand drawn and quartered. So it was a traitor's death. As far as we know, no priests were ever found here. Humphrey seems to have kept his head under the radar, really. We do have a lot of things that I'll say, we think this, we think that, because there aren't many written records, because the family left, there's not a lot of written records left. And of course you'd never write down where your hides were, in case anybody found them. Why are there so many hides here? Possibly because it was like a distribution centre. When the priest came, they would be sent out to different places. We're very close to Hinlip, where Hinlip Hall was. Hinlip Hall doesn't exist anymore, but that probably had more hides than here. So this was really quite a centre, so that's one reason. Another reason could be you need to be able to get in quick wherever you were in the house. So this area has had quite a concentration of Catholics, Catholic houses. Coton Court, I don't know if any of the National Trust Coton Court, Madison Clinton's got a big priest hide there. At Hadley Hall, there was also somebody connected with the plot was called Hadley Hall. And the plotters, those that escaped after Guy Fawkes had been caught, those that actually escaped were caught very near here at Holbeach House, which is very close to Himley Hall. And that's the area, once they realised the plot had failed, it's this area of the country that they came to try and stir up more support. But there's no evidence that Humphrey and his family were involved in that plot, but they must have known some of the people. And of course, once that had happened, it made life even more difficult for the Catholics. So I'm just going to take you through here. Get ready, it's very cold.
We're behind the kitchen now, and this is a view of the priest hide that's above the bread oven.
And you would have had, you can see the bit.
There's a step just here.
Oh yeah, that comes.
Yes, a step down. And the step you came down was the threshold. That's where the word comes from, because the thresh was the reeds on the floor. And you can imagine if you're walking in a long dress, every time you go from room to room, you just be taking it with you. So the threshold is so that it stays in the right rooms. Now, we're going to visit the next 3 rooms in the wrong order. In a Tudor house, you didn't go upstairs and have all your rooms off the landing. They were in a line. So you'd have your private room, your semi-private room, the public room. So we're now in the private room. And this is the room that we think Mary spent her final years in. We think that she probably was here because this is the warmest part of the house. And she, when I say she lived here alone, she lived here alone with a lot of servants, but she lived here alone. She'd outlived her, obviously her father, her husband, her son, and her grandson by the time she died at about 85 and a half. And so this house was then inherited by her granddaughter, who meanwhile had married Lord Throckmorton at Coton Court. It's a grander house than this, so they moved to Coton Court. But they kept this house, this estate, because it had 6,000 acres, it was really valuable. But what they did when they moved, they took basically all the furniture with them. Not only did they take all the furniture with them, they also took the staircase and lots of the panelling. So lots of that stuff was taken. Also the portraits, we've got copies of the so you can tell that anything that was left behind was not considered good enough to take to Coton Court. So this is the original panelling, the original fireplace. They obviously didn't think this was good enough to take with them. A lot of the floorboards are original as well. You can see where their bits have been replaced in rooms as we go around, but a lot of the floorboards are the original floorboards. You can see the room set out as it would have been. We've got the bed here with curtains around it. You would also have the top covered because you didn't always have a plastered ceiling, so you could have all sorts dropping on you, so you'd have that in there. The curtains around you to keep you warm, because even, you know what it's like, even if you've got a fire burning, it can be very cold, so you'd turn. And also for privacy, they would have like a truckle bed underneath, and the servants would sleep in here, so it would give you privacy as well.
The servant would sleep under the bed while you were sleeping?
No, they wouldn't sleep under the bed, but you'd pull the bed out. Yeah, like your maid servants would pull it out. Now we're just going to go across now into the withdrawing room.
Oh, beautiful.
Now you really notice when you come in here the lights, don't you, compared with other rooms. The withdrawing room was the room that the women of the house would withdraw into. It's where the word drawing room comes from. And they would withdraw from the great chamber, and Mary would spend the day here with her friends and family. This is where you do your reading, your writing, you would receive guests during the day, you do your sewing, because it's so much lighter than anywhere else in the house. And this would have been the solar of the original house. So the solar was like the sunroom. You can see the remains of the original timbers. And what it really shows you what Humphrey was doing. He was putting the panelling on top of the medieval house to make it into a nice Tudor house. The ceiling is not original. When it was restored, some of the restoration was done in the 1930s and was now having to be restored. It just fell down just before COVID, and so it hasn't been replaced. So the shape is right, but it's not the original ceiling. The house had really fallen because nobody was living here. It had really become derelict. The other advantage of this room, and if there's people is if you look out the window, you've got a pretty good view of anybody coming to the house. There's 2 roads in. You've got the road that mostly probably come up from the dock. There's also a little lane there that goes towards Chaddesley Corbett, so there's 2 ways in. Otherwise, you're coming across fields. So you did get a bit of an early warning if anybody was coming. Now, it's also the site of our second hide. Now, we've got bits of the hide here. That was actually the original board that went over the hide, and that's the original ladder. Would not be safe to use now. That is the original ladder. Now, originally, that door would not have been here. It would have been the same as that side, 2 alcoves either side of the fireplace. Today, it's a passage into the part of the house. But if you have a look, you can see our next hide. And again, you can see just how uncomfortable it would have been to be in that hide. These are, aren't they? Yes. This ladder down there. Really collapsed in this part of the house. Don't have much use because we sort of see the hides get better as we go up the house. This was a fairly obvious place for a hide, so it probably wasn't in use for very long. And also, it's quite low down in the house, so even a few seconds could be the difference between getting caught and not getting caught. So that's why we think these are the early ones. They get better as we carry on. So is there ever? So we're now in the Great Hall. So this is the public room of the house. This is where you entertain your guests. And we've got the portraits there. There's Humphrey. There's his wife Abigail. They look pretty much the same age, but he actually had his portrait painted about 30 years before hers. So they weren't quite so well matched. And here we've got Mary, and then we've got Archbishop Williams he's the man that really took over the restoration of the house. Over the fireplace, we've got the coats of arms, and you'll see that the red, black, and the gold. So we've got basically the top of the 3 families. We've got the Packingtons. We've got the Yates, and we've got Throckmorton. She was Mary and this whole room would have been painted in red, black and gold. And you'll see that as we go around the house. Now, the door is original. The paint's all been analysed quite recently. So we can see there the pattern. And that would have been all very, very brightly coloured, and it would have gone across the whole of the room. And that's how we know what the wood panelling should look like, because it's exactly copied from the door. You can still see remnants of the medieval paintwork just up here, just behind the desk, so you can just see a bit of it there. Now, this panelling was put in the 1990s. This is Ryan Ferris, who bought the house. Her son was called to the House of Lords, and he took the title Lord Harvington, and he gifted the panelling to the hall. We've got a butler's pantry here. The food is in the kitchen. Obviously, by the time you've got the food up here, it's getting cold. So they bring the food up, keep it there, and then they would bring it in and serve it in the Great Hall. But it also was used to sort of disguise levels in the floor. So it's again part of hiding the hides. If we just look out of this window, when you go, I don't know if you've looked around the outside already, but there are things to see outside as well. It's quite possible, we think, that the house originally went round the four sides of the courtyard. If you think about other Tudor houses and places like Coat and Court, they actually have got an enclosed courtyard. And quite possibly this wasn't even the most important room in the house. It could have been a room that was here. Yeah. We think they may have knocked it down because by then they started to introduce the fireplace tax and the window tax. And it's quite possible, needs a few repairs, it's got a lot of windows in it. Perhaps they just knocked it down as a cost-saving measure. I presume it could be excavated, but it would cost a lot of money because it's a protected building. It would be quite expensive to do. So it's, and we start to see now, if you're just looking at the walls, there are little scraps of paint. The ones we're going to see now, there's really just little scraps. But over the doorway, it's the mermaid passage. You can see the remains of a painting of a double-tailed mermaid, like this Starbucks mermaid. Was painted over, and that's the other unusual thing about the house. You've got the hides and you've got the paintings. The paintings are very unusual because most houses like this were restored, were renovated, they were papered, you know, and you know, those pictures were destroyed. Here they were just painted over with a lime wash, so when you clean that off, you find the remains of these paintings underneath. So why was the mermaid painted over? Perhaps they thought she wasn't quite appropriate for the house. Be careful now, we have got some bumpy floors and some steps. There's going to be steps here when you go have a look at the mermaid.
Where's the mermaid?
There,
Oh, I
the
see.
double tail.
Interesting.
Look at the floor.
It's all shapes and amazing.
That's right, he's working out what to do. So we're now in Dr. Dodd's library. Dr. Dodd was a pseudonym of a priest that lived here. Once the young men would go abroad to train as priests, they would change their name. They would never use their family name again. So if they were caught, it wouldn't endanger their family. So Dr. Dodd he wrote a history of the church in England. And so we know he was here. But this room has probably had many, many uses over the years. This is probably the most famous of the hides, and we think we're now going to look at some hides that were built by a man called Nicholas Owen, who actually became a saint, St Nicholas Owen. He was the greatest of all the hide builders, and we think at some point he came to Harvington. Probably, if you were going to build hides, you'd probably send as much of your family away. You send them off on a visit, so there'd be as few people in the house as possible. And he came here as a carpenter, and he built the Great Staircase. We are going to see the Great Staircase, but it's a replica. The original was at Coat and Court. And while he was doing that, we think he was building these hides. Poor old Nicholas did reach a rather sticky end. He was caught very near here at Hinlip Hall, and he had the misfortune of being with Father Garnet. Now, Father Garnet had not been directly involved in the Gunpowder Plot, but he knew the plotters and he'd heard confessions from them. So once the plotters had all been caught and killed, basically he was probably enemy number one. And they were at Hinlip House in 1606. I think Nicholas Owen had the misfortune of being with him, and they were found in a hide at Hinlip Hall. They were taken to London. Nicholas Owen died on the rack. And Father Garnet was accused of traitor's death, hanged, drawn and quartered. You know, it's a warning to everybody, but it's just a reminder that we're not just talking about religion here, we're talking about political power as well. That's what made the Catholics dangerous. Right, so we've had to get you said over here, didn't you? Well, you're in the right direction, definitely. Yeah, so if you were small children now, I'd let you come up, but I'm afraid it's not safe for adults. So this is.
Definitely wouldn't be doing that.
This would have been a cupboard. Books would have been stored in a cupboard, like they're piled up here. So this would have had doors on it. So when the pursuivants were here, they'd be knocking to see anywhere that's hollow. So if they knocked on here, they'd get the doors, they'd empty the books out, they'd knock on there, that was hollow, they probably might smash through that. But if you hit on the beam, it makes a completely different sound. So what we've got here is a swing beam hide. Now, it looks different now, but of course that's because it's been opened and touched by so many people. But actually, it's a swing beam. So the priest would go in there, which tells us a lot about the size of priests as well. You've got to be pretty skinny to get through there. So the priest would get in there and then he would lock himself in from inside. Now, you can't come here, but as we go up the steps, you'll be able to see into the back of the hide, and it's much more comfortable. It's about as high as this. And you could lie down. 2 men could lie in it, several could sit in it. So it is a much more comfortable hide, much better hidden, and a little bit more complicated to get to in the house than the ones that we've already seen.
So high, right.
In here, just here.
Yeah.
Ah.
It was a long time ago that this was ever a nursery. But there's a couple of things in here to represent it. We've got the cradle, and work out what this is.
Yeah. Baby.
A baby walker, yeah, baby walker. The little crash helmet. You keep your children, unless you're trained to walk, off the floor, because who knows what's lurking in all the stuff on the floor. Now, this room is an ante-room for a room here that was used as a chapel, because we know it was used up until the 1740s as a chapel. So you'd have to have a way for your priest to escape from there, and we'll look at that later. But this room is the ante-room to it, and you can see it's got, that window is not original, obviously, with the stained glass again. This has got views over the fields, and then again views over both roads leading to Harvington Hall. Now, you make sure that all your servants were Catholics, because you could get betrayed by your servants. There's a story that Hagley Hall, someone connected with the plot was there, a servant noticed a lot more food was being eaten than usual, reported it. So you want to make sure you've got loyal servants. Now this gives you kind of again, an idea of what these rooms would have looked like. Again, we think of these white walls, but they wouldn't have been. They would have been covered in paintings. So we can see just the remnants here of vines with pomegranates on them. You can see it was on the ceiling as well, because you still got part of it preserved on the ceiling. So the whole room would have been covered. At some point, because of change of use we talked about, I've somebody's put a fireplace in here. Taken absolutely no notice of the wall paintings and put in a fireplace. But this whole room would have been decorated. Now they'd have had the services here, for obvious reasons. We're near the top of the house, so if anybody arrives, it's going to take a while. You'd probably invite your friends to come along as well if they wanted to come. So you'd probably have quite a lot of people up here. You have people keeping watch from here as well. Priest would be taking mass. He couldn't have an altar, but he could have it. So you'd have a chest of drawers perhaps, which you would then convert into an altar. Now in here we've got our next hide. Now if anybody's agile enough, would like to pick it up, but I can't bend my knee at the moment, so I can't get down. This is the other hide here. Now you can see the changing colour of the floorboards. That's just because we keep lifting it up. It would have been the same as the others. And of course you'd originally have had the rush carpet thrown everywhere. And it's about this deep. It's really, really small. It's not for the priest. It's for the massing stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So if you just lift up the edge, yeah, that's it. Yeah. Can you just see here? So it's not very big at all. Yeah. Oh yes, yeah. I've got
Candle in there.
So you put the massive. Thank you. Mind your fingers.
Any 2 bags in there?
Stuff in here, and then the priest hide elsewhere. So if he was caught, he hadn't actually got any incriminating evidence on him. So I'm hoping we're not going to meet the other group now. We're going to cross over the corridor, but as we go, you'll see on the right there's a small chapel. You'd expect a house like this to have a chapel in it. What you can't have is anything that indicates that you're a Catholic. So it's a small chapel with the water and the blood of the Passion painted on the walls. So if you want to look at that as we go now. Is made to look like a fireplace, and it's even possible if they had time, perhaps they put some wood in there, burning wood, to make it look like a fireplace. But the priest would climb up here and he would crawl the entire length of the building right to the very end. At the very end of the attic there's another hide. So when you imagine creaking, you know, you've got a room full of soldiers and you're crawling across the ceiling to get to that hide at the end. So that, if you'd like to have a look up there, you can get some idea of him getting up. Had 9 wordless passages. It was quite common. I think this is one of, I don't know if it's the only one or the very, very few of these that remain, and there's just a couple of references to them in books. But the 9 worthies was a kind of something that you'd invite your guests to come and have a look at. The 9 worthies were 9 great men. There was a group of men that you could pick from. You had 3 from the Bible, 3 from classical history, and 3 from modern day. Now, modern day was King Arthur was one of the modern ones. We've got Guy of Warwick here. And these were sort of meant to be the kind of men that all young gentlemen would aspire to. They had the qualities of a fine gentleman. And it was a kind of, it was something like, you know, you wouldn't say, come and see my big screen TV. You'd come and say, come and see my 9 worthies corridor here as a way of showing off. So it has, there's been speculation, why is it at the top of the house? You know, usually you'd expect it to be at the bottom of the house. But if these were the rooms that were used by guests, then it would make sense that you would have it here for your guests to enjoy. So as we go down, again, and this is these date back to 1600, so they're in the Renaissance style. Whatever period of history they're from, they're all painted as if it was happening in 1600, as you'll see from the costumes. And there's only remnants of them, but enough for us to know the colours and for us to work out what's happening. But we've only got 6, not 9. The others have been lost. So if we come on here. Here we've got Hercules, and you can see Hercules' arm and the little bits of colour on here.
Was it always sloping, or was it subsidence?
It's subsidence over the years. It's all just gone. I don't think they were good. They didn't have very much in the way of foundations, did they?
Buildings moved. That's the whole point.
This is David and Goliath. You see the soldiers in contemporary costumes. Again, you can pick out the paint. Then you've got a parallel story going underneath here. So you've got a bishop with a bishop's crook here. Here we've got Samson, and we've got dead bodies and armour at the bottom. You can see Samson here. We've got a sort of battle scene there.
Wow.
Got Guy of Warwick here, you can see him there with his helmet. Hold up this bit again. Here we've got Joshua from the Bible, supporting the Pharisees,
nice,
with a dead king underneath.
Oh, I see the colour as well in his face.
Yes, you can see there's enough colour for us to pick up what there would have been. Behind you we've got Pompey, the Roman. Yeah.
They've survived pretty well, haven't they? Sorry? They've survived pretty well.
Oh, look at the colour.
Here we are at the main staircase that we think Nicholas Owen came to build. As I said before, the original has gone to Coton Court. This was built in the 1940s, so possibly that's another indication that might be true. Now you can see scraps of paint on the walls. As we go down, actually, it's much more vivid. but the whole thing would have been painted in this red, black and gold design. And if you look closely, you can see the technique, because it was blown on with straws. So you can see all the tiny little bubbles where they blew on the design. And you can also see here the shadow of the banister. Elizabethans were very keen on this idea of shadow painting to get the symmetry, so you can see the banister on the other side. Now, while Nicholas Owen was building this staircase, he built the last two heights that we're going to see. So if I could just so here we have the heights.
Wow.
So we've actually got two hides. We've got like a double hide. There's a large hide, and if you think back to those early hides that you saw at the bottom of the house, look how spacious that is compared with the others. So much more comfortable. The priest would go through in there and lock himself in. But in front of that, you've got another hide, a very small hide, and that's like a safe. That's where they would keep their valuables. So the idea is the pursuivant would do a search. If they found the hide, they'd only find the valuables hide. They think that they'd struck the jackpot. They wouldn't look any further. So you've got your safe, so that would be perfectly accepted by the pursuivants, but behind it you've got your priest hidden, and right up at the top of the house. And our house manager, I spent about a day and a half in that hide, with a loaf of bread and an apple and no lights.
So how did they get into that one then?
If you have a look, you'd climb over. He'd lower yourself in through the hole.
Oh right, yeah.
So he'd wheel his way in, and then he'd have at the door, which he would fit and lock from the inside.
Yeah.
Oh, the original lock. Oh, look at that. As we leave this house of secrets, we think about the house that was formed to protect the people within it. Its finely crafted hiding places, its strange doorways and passages designed to trick the mind and disorientate and delay priest hunters. And its well-preserved wall paintings, the only treasures that could not be stolen. It was a privilege to step back in time, but we're grateful for our present-day freedom.